hello to you, and welcome to the Richard Nicholls podcast, the personal development podcast series that's here to help inspire, educate, and motivate you to be the best you can be. I'm psychotherapist Richard Nicholls, and this is episode 183. It's titled The Meaning Behind the Thinking. And if you're ready, we'll start the show. Hey people, how are you all? I've got a treat for you this month. Well, you might think it's a treat, I don't know yet, because last month, for Mental Health Awareness Week, I made some live streams over YouTube, Facebook and Instagram. If you're on my newsletter subscription list, then you'd have had an email about it. It was basically an extra long podcast episode, because I've been asked many times if I'd ever consider a live show in a theatre or something to maybe do a little UK tour, north, south, east, west and Midlands, that sort of thing, for you to come and see me in person. And it would be a lovely thing to do, and maybe I will one day, but obviously not right now, not when we're still halfway through trying to control the spread of a highly contagious virus. So I did it online instead, which was less scary for me because it didn't matter if only 10 people showed up and I could do it for free. Turns out a lot more than 10 people showed up on all of them, even on Instagram. And that means holding a phone for nearly an hour. And like I say to my online clients who want therapy using their phone, it's not always how heavy something is that makes it difficult. It's how long you've been holding it for. But there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of you in total, so thank you very much for joining me live. And for those of you that missed it or had to dip in and out, as I suggested, I'm going to edit the video down because I recorded one of the live streams, and I'm going to put it out throughout this month on the public podcast feed for everyone to listen along to. And I'll stick it on YouTube as well, actually, so you can actually watch me if you should so desire. So there'll be 4 of them, 4 extra episodes. Well, 4 in total, so 3 extra ones for the public. And there'll be 1 each week throughout June, all revolving around a similar theme, which is about our internal dialogue, our inner voice. So here's the first section. I've edited out the first couple of minutes because it's just me introducing the idea of live stuff and sort of fiddling with the camera and things. And I just talked about how it differed from my shorter normal episodes. So, on with the show. Dip in and out if you want to a degree. I'm going to be talking about the same topic, but you can dip in and out and come back at a later stage. Because I know if you're so used to just listening to me for 15 minutes, it's going to feel quite strange to do it for a longer time. So I know from when I've done longer episodes in the past, everybody seems to prefer short and sweet, which is good because I'm only 5'6", which is 3 inches shorter than the UK average, 5'6". The UK average is 5'9". And I mention this because there are a couple of ways of thinking about that. And that's what I want to start with today, because I'm not that bothered about being 5'6". It's a bit of a pain reaching for things in supermarkets, but I doubt that an extra couple of inches is going to make much of a difference, to be honest, anyway. And 5'8", according to online dating services, is the most attractive height. So I'm only 2 inches shorter. And yeah, 5'8" men are the most highly rated, apparently the most desirable. Second is 5'10". But guess what's third? 5'6". Yes, so I am the 3rd most desirable height for men, more desirable than 6 foot, which was number 4. So I mention this because in my experience, the emotional response that we get in life is generated not by the words themselves, but by the meaning that's behind them. Because I can measure my height as many times as I like, and it's still going to be 5'6". Now, that can either mean I am the 3rd most desirable height for a man, or it can mean that I'm 3 inches shorter than the UK average, depending on how I think about it. And sometimes I do get tall people who say to me, "Crikey, you're shorter than I thought you'd be." And I used to be a bit funny about that. I'm not sure what people expect from my voice. Guessing somebody's height from a podcast can't be particularly easy, but I will meet people at conferences and they'll come and shake my hand and tell me that they love what I do. And then they'll follow it up with something like, I thought you'd be taller. And that interests me because studies have shown that across pretty much all cultures, taller stature is linked to increased social status. So maybe there's this link that says the more respect I have for somebody, the taller that they must be, which means the opposite must be true. The shorter someone is, the less respect they deserve. And that's not good if you believe that yourself. Now, I don't get offended anymore. Was I really offended in the first place? Don't know. Probably not really. But life is going to throw these sorts of experiences at us sometimes. We're going to have we're going to be offended. We're going to meet grumpy people that want conflict or deliberately disagree with us just for the sake of an argument. And we're going to get the bigger things as well. We're going to lose loved ones, sadly. We're probably going to lose our job at some point. We're not going to have the perfect life after all. And we do need to be okay with that, especially in a culture that seems to suggest that anything short of perfection is a failure. And when we have this outside-in attitude towards emotion, as if the way we feel all comes from the outside influences rather than the internal ones, we get dragged down by everything that goes wrong, thinking that we would have to change the world around us to feel better. But our emotions aren't created with an outside-in process. It's an inside-out process. Everything we feel is a reaction to our experiences, and we need to find a way of using that to our advantage rather than being overwhelmed with everything that gets thrown at us. Because we live in a world of thought, not a world of circumstances. And there's been plenty of research that backs this up as well. Our mood, our anxiety, our happiness, you've probably heard me talk about this before, is a combination of genetics, thoughts, and circumstances, and in that order as well. 50% genetics, 40% thoughts, but 10% circumstances. It's really common if we're in a bad place to think we have to change the circumstances in order for things to improve. But at best, we're only going to influence 10% of our well-being unless we think differently about it. And that's the same for all our problems as well. The circumstances themselves are only going to influence 10% of our mood, but the way we think is then going to control 40%. That's why someone with depression can still be happy. Depression isn't always lying in bed and unable to get up. It can be, but depression, which if we play with it is the brain's inability to allow pleasure, can get put to one side for a few minutes, given the right circumstances. If we're able to let these positive circumstances influence us, I suppose. It might only be temporary, especially with major depressive disorder, but it's a start and gives us hope that we aren't stuck. But even somebody with treatment-resistant major depressive disorder could still watch a TV show that they like, that's funny, and laugh. They can listen to a laughter chain of children all giggling and stuff, and they'll laugh. And in that moment, they'll be happy. But of course, we can't live there. We can't live in the outside-in world. It has to be inside out. And putting major depression to one side, I mean, it exists, but really only a small percentage of people are going to have that. For most of us, if we're unhappy, it's because of what's going on inside rather than what's going on outside. And when we can realise this, that's when we stop trying to change the external world in this pointless, desperate attempt at trying to live this happier life. I'm not saying ignore the external world and you could become a minimalist with no possessions. Not sure if that's absolutely necessary. Just being aware that in trying to control what's going on around you, you'll create a fruitless process that leads maybe to more anxiety or depression. And realising this means we can look more inward for solutions so that we can lead a more satisfying and fulfilling life, because we can. Our thoughts are the architects of both our stress and our calm. We know this. We can stress ourselves out by thinking about deadlines and using negative language. If we say, I can't do this, this is never going to work, it's going to have an emotional response. but so is I'm going to do my best and see if it works. Now, one's going to create anxiety and the other one won't, or at least the stress you might experience is going to become manageable. Because sometimes emotions do seem to come first. A lot of our thoughts are unconscious. They happen so quickly, they're outside of conscious awareness. So there's a reaction in our body that we call stress or anxiety, and we need to control it with a few deep breaths and a healthier conscious thought process that, if you give it enough repetition, becomes unconscious and habitual, becomes second nature. Just takes time, takes patience. But we aren't born with depression. We might be born with a genetic disposition, but we know that what switches it on isn't our experiences. It's how we feel about our experiences, and how we feel has to come from what we think. It sounds harsh because it almost makes it sound as if bad mental health is something that we all just do to ourselves. And, well, I guess to some of us, maybe it is to a degree, in a way. But when these things happen, it seems like we don't have any choice but to react badly, which brings ourselves down. We don't feel like we've got a choice. In that moment, we didn't. We can't control what our brain and body does when it's automatic. We can't control depression any more than we can control hiccups or goosebumps or male pattern baldness. But accepting it and learning how to move on from it, that can be a choice. It's just hard and likely to take a bit of time and a lot of work. But to change how you feel from day to day, we have to look to our thoughts, not just our feelings. If you only try to change the feelings with deep breaths, meditation, you're going to miss the cause of the emotions and never move on. So sure, take some deep breaths. Do learn to slow down your mind with hypnosis and meditation, stuff like that. But you also have to take control over what goes on in your thoughts. And that might mean you need medication to help you. There's no shame in that. It's not a cop-out, no more than taking a one-a-day vitamin supplement because your diet isn't as nutrient-rich as your body needs. No one shames you for not having all of your 5 a day, I hope. So don't shame yourself for needing some help controlling your thoughts. Because once you do, you can then challenge the fears and insecurities that pop in. And rather than make it worse by exaggerating everything, you can make it better by being more positive and optimistic. Remember, the brain can't separate fact from fiction. So thinking about how bad things are going to be is going to trick your brain into creating bad responses. Thinking about how good things are going to be instead will trick your brain into creating good responses. Because there is a difference between thought and thinking. Thinking is what you do to make thoughts, in the same way that hanging wallpaper is what you do to decorate, or drawing a monster is what you do to make a picture. But it doesn't have to be a monster that you draw, does it? It can be a peach, a love heart, a smiley face. But it depends what you get used to drawing, doesn't it? Now, I'm not an artist by a long measure. My drawing skills are pretty awful. And even at 44 years old, if I think about drawing a house, I feel that pull to draw a square with a triangle on the top for the roof, and then a little rectangle chimney with some curly smoke going out of it, with the sun in the top right-hand corner in a quarter circle with lines for sunbeams. I'm 44. Yet when I first started to learn to draw at age 3 or whatever, that's what a house looked like. Now, I could learn to draw a house better. I'm not sure what the benefits would be. If there was one, I would put the effort in to learn how to angle a pencil so that it creates straighter lines or whatever. We're not daft. We know that if we want to get better at something, we've got to learn how to do it and then practice. And it's the same with our thoughts. We have to learn how to think positively and then practice. So here's your first lesson. When it comes to thinking positively, and that is simply to frame things positively. And I know that sounds a bit obvious, doesn't it, really? But there is a big difference between I'm not going to fail and I'm going to succeed. It's like telling a child not to touch something. They'll think about touching it, and then they'll probably touch it. In order to know what not to do, the brain has to process the idea of the thing you're trying to avoid. So that means we need to get out of the habit of thinking about not experiencing what we don't want, and instead think about experiencing what we do, if that makes sense. So that's lesson 1. Lesson 2 is about taking control of your thoughts and putting things to one side. This takes practice, really does. And I've spoken about the CBT thought stopping a few times on my podcast, the idea of capturing your attention with a stop sign and shouting in your mind to interrupt your thoughts. And if you're a long time listener, you've probably heard me go on about that quite a lot. But actually someone did ask me recently to go over it again, as they wanted a reminder. So if they weren't alone in needing that reminder, I'll go through it here for you. Thought stopping is based on the CBT concept that thoughts influence your emotions, and then your emotions influence your behaviour, which creates thoughts, and round and round and round it goes. So if you can learn to interrupt one of those things, it has an influence on the rest. That's the idea, and it does. We interrupt the emotions, the feelings in our body with some deep breathing exercises. We interrupt behaviour with new activities, and we interrupt thoughts with distraction. Now, in my experience, starting with the thoughts is more beneficial than trying to jump straight in with just accepting thoughts. Eventually, you want to be able to see your thoughts as just thoughts. Imagination, not reality. To just notice thoughts, accept them, move on from them. But a lot of people find that hard, and so thought stopping is a great place to start. Now, the key to this, I find, is not in the stopping itself. It's what you do with your thoughts straight afterwards. That's where the new habit starts. That you spend more time thinking about different things other than whatever it is that your brain wants you to obsess about. So if you find yourself with some unwanted thoughts, I want you to shout as loud as you can the word stop. Stop! As loud as you can in your head. If you're alone, fine, shout it out for real, but you might get some concerns from the neighbours. But in your head is probably best. So, if your thoughts are going to places you don't want them to go, you shout the word stop to interrupt the thoughts, and think about something visual here, something that represents the word stop, like a stop sign, a traffic light, a bald man on a video screen screaming the word stop at you. Stop! Doesn't matter what you think about, but you need to think about something, because that's where taking control starts. All you've got in your mind is the word stop. So you have some extra control over what you're thinking now, and then you can take your mind onto something else, and you must. You can't just stop your thoughts and hope for the best. The obsessive stuff here has got too much emotion attached to it, and it's just going to creep back in. And similarly, just thinking about the theme from Fraggle Rock isn't strong enough to interrupt your thoughts. But if you can stop your thoughts first and then take your mind onto the theme from Fraggle Rock, or the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, My Old Man's a Dustman, or the Kiora advert from 1987, you remember that? I'll be your dog. Doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's better than the stuff that you were trying to stop. You'll find that with practice, you get more control over your thoughts and over your life, but it takes practice. But I want to prove to you that you can do it with a little exercise. It's in 2 parts. So, in a moment, I'm going to ask you to count in your mind from 1 to 20 in a regular rhythm. And the second part is going to be just to say your name out loud, if it's appropriate, but in your mind is fine. Just your name, and then carry on counting. So, if you're ready, in your mind, start counting now. And say your name, and keep on counting. And say your name, and carry on counting. And stop. So, silly, I know, but we didn't really need to get to 20 after all. But when you said your name, what happened to the numbers? They probably stopped, didn't they? You had to pause the counting to say your name, and then you picked up where you left off. Now, there are always exceptions to this. Some people hear 2 things in their mind at once, but most people, hopefully you as well, find that the numbers pause for a second. And if this is you, knowing that you can interrupt your thoughts is really useful. It shows you that you have the ability to move away from thoughts that cause you stress. It just takes practice to make it second nature. And once you get good at controlling your thoughts, you can then begin to accept them, sometimes with a better narrative, if that makes sense. More appropriate mental narratives are important, I think. That seemed like a good enough place as any to pause it and come back to it next week, so we'll do that. But before I go, I want to throw some recognition onto my new patrons, by the way. If you want to support the podcast because you appreciate what I do, then Patreon is the right place to do that, because I really don't like the idea of adverts to fund this. Don't get me wrong, I've got nothing against HelloFresh, The Economist and Squarespace, but it doesn't feel right for me to advertise stuff. I'd much rather we sorted it all out amongst ourselves. And so I advertise my own content, which you can get if you become a patron at patreon.com/Richard Nicholls. For less than the price of a cup of coffee once a week, you can get new episodes from me every single Monday morning, as well as anything else that I end up chucking at you throughout the month as well. Just like these amazing folk did throughout May. There was, hello new patrons, Monica, Robert, Margarita, Natasha, Fee, Kate, Camilla, Tanya, John, Dave, Simon, Jane, Joanne, Clarissa, Penny, Oliver, Matt and Amanda. I love you. I can't do this without you. And you are making the world a better place as well, because it might not seem like much, just chucking £2 a week at me or whatever, but when enough of us do it, it makes a big difference to some people. It really, really does, because we use this money to fund therapy for people and to support some charities as well. The Samaritans and the PDSA had some from us this month, as well as the usual ones that I've mentioned before. So not only do you get exclusive content when you're a patron, you also deserve a warm worm. Don't deserve a worm, but you get a warm lump of self-esteem as well. So I love you and leave you for today. You know where I am if you need me, and I will speak to you all very soon. Bye!